Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Tuesday, April the 1st, 2025. Do not adjust your set. There are no April Fools in this morning's podcast. Everything is deadly serious, I'm afraid. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy of Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the morning politics podcast that reads the papers, digests all of those briefings and WhatsApps, and has spoken to major players to give you everything you need in under 20 minutes.
It's Tuesday. Our regular Tuesday feature is the weekly YouGov Sky Times opinion poll, voting intention poll. So we're very much still in the era of three-party politics. It's a tie at the top. Labour up 1 on 24, Reform up 1 on 23. The Conservatives down 1 on 21, Lib Dems down 2 on 14, and Greens up 1 on 11. So there hasn't been a material change in voting intention since the start of the year. Of course, it's a big drop for Labour compared to the general election when it was in the lowish 30s, and the vote on the right of British politics still split. So that overall picture as we head towards the local elections is unchanged.
In many ways, rising prices are the most important thing for most voters today. You'll hear a lot about the minimum wage. That's Keir Starmer's answer to the above inflation bill rises most people will be seeing there across energy, water, TV, stamp duty, and, well, pretty much everything else you can imagine. Meanwhile, the leader of Birmingham City Council has declared a major incident over the bin strike and appealed to Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner for central government help. What would we be seeing there?
It's interesting. I think for people in the West Midlands, that probably is the most direct impact that government is and isn't having on your daily life. I was up there a couple of weeks ago ahead of the spring statement, and I talked to the Conservative councillor Tim Huxtable, who's sort of in charge of environmental waste for the Tories. He shadows that brief. And he was the one who told us there were rats as big as cats there. I see it repeated anonymously all over the papers. So I just wanted to put a name of the source of the person who said it. Tim Huxtable, the Tory councillor in Birmingham Council, said that there were rats as big as cats. He didn't have any to show at the time of filming, but even accounting for a little bit of politician exaggeration, the stench and just the whole atmosphere in Birmingham, as you drive through residential streets with the bin bags all piled up, it's pretty interesting and actually pretty horrifying to see that the industrial dispute that has a myriad of complex reasons behind it, but it boils down to pay, is having that impact on people's lives. Right, where are we going to start this morning, Anne?
Well, I think we'll start with the cabinet because it's usual jolly self. But it does seem that there are some schisms emerging, and I think you've got some of the skinny on that.
The thing is, this isn't gossip. This isn't tittle-tattle, as some people say.
Heaven no.
Cabinet dynamics really, really matters. Who has the ear of the PM really, really matters. Groups, if you're in it, you're in a group. If you're not in it, it's a gang. And people working together in cabinet, that's probably would be seen as a good thing. People combining to kind of face down others, well, maybe that's not so good. But with every cabinet that you face, you try to work out what are the fundamental fault lines between the people, between the 25 to 30 people sitting in that room every Tuesday morning. And it all the way through Keir Starmer's time as leader of the Labour Party and through the various permutations of the shadow cabinet, it hasn't always been completely easy to work out what the different gangs are. That both seem to be none and too many. As a guy who doesn't really run a government sort of infused with ideology, it's perhaps no surprise that the cabinet beneath him also doesn't have that. But I do think, having had lots of conversations about this over a long period of time, there is a sense of one gang, one group, more than any other in cabinet, that people are aware of its presence of, and think that the fact that there are particularly close ties between this group of people is having an impact. And between this group, they think that you can't really put a cigarette paper between them, and they are very coordinated.
You're dropping the lead. Who's in it?
Right. So it's got at its centre, really, figures like Wes Streeting, the health secretary, Peter Kyle, the science secretary, and they would openly describe each other as best friends. You've got Rachel Reeves, the chancellor, who is clearly part of that gang. And if you go anywhere near any member of this group, you won't find any of them really criticising her. They're very, very defensive of her, when at a time where some others in the cabinet, perhaps less so, less supportive, and certainly other Labour MPs, this group absolutely has mission critical defending the Chancellor. You've got Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. Pat McFadden is sort of in there quite a lot. Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall, long time on the right of the Labour Party. You would call her a Blairite. And there are some others, I think, who would count themselves as part of that group, even though they're not in the cabinet. So what is this? Well, it's a group of people, I think, in some senses, who would label themselves reformers and modernisers. And yes, that means that some of them think that they are modernisers and others around the cabinet table are not. My interest was first pricked up as long ago as about a year ago, where I was seeing one of them for lunch, and they mentioned that this gang have a WhatsApp group. Now, that's a frequent way to coordinate, but it means that there is a subgroup of government that are coordinating on both a friendly basis using Westminster's favourite system. I was kind of quite struck in the last few days because somebody who works with this group said that they go for cabinet breakfasts sometimes, so there is a sense of coordination, and this is where we get to talking to people around the place. It seems that there is clearly coordination around the cabinet table, according to people who aren't in that group, and they will always agree around the cabinet table with the positions of one another, and that, I think, really does have an impact on dynamics. If you talk to people outside of this group, there is a nervousness of them. There's sort of almost a fear that this is the group from where some of the briefing might emanate. There is a sense that this group is very, very close. Every time Keir Starmer has a little bit of a wobble, this group seems to get closer to him, and over the course of the time running the Labour Party, ideologically, Keir Starmer's decisions have sort of got closer and closer to this lot, even though perhaps you would have thought Keir Starmer comes much more from the Ed Miliband wing of the party originally, and that's what his leadership campaign looked like. But this is the group, the kind of modernising, reforming wing. Some of them think that others around the cabinet table are not doing enough, did not have enough of a plan when they came into government. And I think that tells you that, that kind of view in itself, it causes a bit of friction. But it's just that gang. I don't really have a word for it. The most talented politician of that lot is probably Wes Streeting, so you could call them the Wesleyites. But he's just on in interviews and in person, he is a performer like none of the others. There's a lot of talent, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with coordinating and working with your allies in cabinet, and in many ways it's a very, very, organising is the principle at the heart of politics, and it's the right thing to do. It's just this group seems to do it, and if you're in it, it's probably very sensible, and if you're not in it, you're probably a bit suspicious of it. What do you make of that, Anne?
I think that's fascinating. In some ways, it takes us back, doesn't it, to those old divides between, if you like, the soft left of Labour in government, whether under Tony Blair or Gordon Brown, and those who saw themselves as more in the centre ground, or as their rivals would see it, or detractors would see it, had gone too far towards the right of centre. And you can hear that sort of playing out a bit again, can't you, in the response to the welfare cuts and the disability cuts, that it's gone a bit too Tory, somehow overnight, by a weird alchemy from the Treasury, the OBR, Rachel Reeves, and Liz Kendall, welfare reform has gone into something that strikes some people towards, and I don't even mean the far left, but the soft left, as being too much like something Conservatives would do. So what you point out there really sort of is an extra layer of intrigue on top of that, because if you're not in that group, and it may well be a great idea for people who need to drive forward an agenda. We're always talking about silo busting these days, aren't we, in business and politics? The problem is when you bust that silo and then other people are not included, they're bound to feel either they're going to think, well, I didn't really want to be in your gang anyway. My politics are different. And I think that's a bit where Angela Rayner, just to throw in another name here, is sitting now, very much sort of feeling that she's ploughing her own furrow, that can easily turn into a bit of a turf war. And it's interesting, she writes in the Eye today a very stalwart defence of her workers' rights bill, the employment rights bill, even though the OBR last week said the package would have net negative impacts on the economy, increasing inflation and decreasing productivity. She's very punchy. She says 10 million people will benefit from the plan. I think we know that in the background, and you're well sourced on this, and I've been speaking to people as well, that there's a bit of tension between Rachel Reeves's teams and Angela Rayner's teams, and as the sense that having committed to this bill, this plan for employment rights, including those controversial day one rights for workers, etc., that Angela Rayner can say quite reasonably, well, you guys went along with this, don't blame me for this. But the sense that she's out there talking in a different way to the agenda of, what is it you call them, the Wesleyites, the streeting gang, those the streeting fighters.
Street fighters.
That's just the beginning. It would be amazing if it just stayed like this, knowing what we know about politics, right? It just feels that there's something there. And then there are swing states. Probably the biggest one is Ed Miliband, who I would say is just putting a characterization on Ed and knowing his politics pretty well over a lot of years. He's probably more in that soft left camp, but he's usually quite careful, isn't he, not to get too embroiled in turf wars. He knows from bitter experience of his own that there are risks to that. So he seems to sort of suck it up as long as he can pursue his net zero agenda as closely as possible. But I think what you put your finger on is a kind of alembic. Can you put your finger on an alembic? What you pointed out is that there's a sort of alembic here of ambition, some frustration, and that we're likely to see this play out in some way, because once you've got one gang in, you've also got one out.
If you find a Labour MP or a minister, it doesn't often take too long before the sotto voce, kind of slightly hushed discussion, imaginary discussion, if there is a Labour leadership contest, who would it be between? And the two names that you hear most are Wes Streeting versus Angela Rayner. So it's sort of not a surprise that if you put sort of one gang that centred, I wouldn't say around Wes, because that's putting it too strongly, but he's without doubt kind of one of the standout performers. If you put him high up there, then you have to sort of put Angela Rayner, elevate her as another figure. Of course, they were taking chunks out of each other at the end of last year, with Wes Streeting sort of making jokes about her at the Spectator Parliamentarian of the Year, and all of that causing a little bit of friction in return in the immediate aftermath of the departure of Lou Haig, the ex-Transport Secretary, who was a close ally of Angela Rayner. But just looking around the rest of the cabinet table, another way of thinking of another little grouping, and I'm not sure that their relationship is as formalised as the first one that I talked about, but you do have a group of people who used to be in government. So that is Yvette Cooper, John Healey and Ed Miliband. So that is another sort of way of thinking about three of them as a bit of a counterweight to the people who are possibly the self-described modernisers. But it's going to be fascinating to watch. And just one issue around which there is a little bit of friction was what's more important. It's a sort of theoretical, fascinating, ideological test. What's more important? Kind of like the missions, like delivering those specific goals, or reform? Because there are some in the modern, self-described modernising camp who think the thing this government has got to do is reform. And sure, you can jimmy your bit of public services to achieve the goal that's set in the missions, but actually, if you don't reform it, you're not really doing the job that you should be doing in government. Whereas there are other cabinet ministers who think delivering the promise to the British people, as set out in the plan for change by Keir Starmer at the end of last year, that's the most important thing. So what is your number one goal is actually another thing that it's not a divide, it's not a massive gulf, but there are just different instincts. And that's another reason why this matters. All of this comes down to priorities and how you use the limited bandwidth of government for your own ends.
Well, let's go to another big theatre of turf wars, and that's over tariffs and the big transatlantic story, of course, as Liberation Day looms tomorrow, April the 2nd, with that one-shot huge imposition of tariffs being promised or threatened by the Trump administration. The difficulty for the UK government here is perhaps the expectations were raised that we might get some sort of relief or carve out from this. That now looks to have just gone completely down the drain. We're going to be as affected by as anyone else in this first round of tariffs, simply, Sam, because Donald Trump wants it to be seen as a no exceptions, absolute blunderbuss move there on trade. And it feels, therefore, like relatively little is at the moment on offer coming out of all of that shuttle diplomacy. I mean, Jonathan Reynolds has certainly got his air miles, must be in quite a good state by now on his account. But it doesn't feel like that's bearing a lot of fruit. Now, we do hear that negotiations on things like tech and services will continue beyond Wednesday. That's very much the message from British officials, to get a carve out somewhere down the line. But to compound the government's woes, because it's that kind of April, the Telegraph and others reporting a statement from the US State Department saying that they were concerned about freedom of speech, and that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State in the US, has expressed concerns about freedom of expression in the UK in a case involving an anti-abortion campaigner in Bournemouth who had been on trial for breaching a buffer zone outside an abortion clinic. No free trade without free speech seems to be a bit of a theme bubbling up there, which is, obviously the last thing the government here needs is something that has just ignited that kind of interest in the Trump administration.
Look, if there are reasons why Downing Street, the business department, frankly, everybody involved in the economy needed to worry, that they're all over the place in the papers, and you can pick them up fairly easily in conversations with ministers and others. As ever with stories involving Trump, there's been quite a lot overnight. If I just bring you up to date with the kind of very latest, Donald Trump is playing with people when he talks about this. He won't even say that the tariff announcement is tomorrow. He sort of said it might even be tonight. You're just going to have to wait and see. But the Treasury Secretary, who's got a good claim to know what's going on, and not everybody in the American administration has that, but Scott Bessent gave a Fox News interview on Monday saying that the tariff announcement will be at 3 p.m. Washington time on Wednesday. So that's 8 o'clock on Wednesday is when the Treasury Secretary says that we're going to get the announcement. And the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, she is saying that that's the moment that Donald Trump is going to announce the tariffs, right? And that's key because it hasn't been clear whether or not the announcement is automatically coupled with the immediate introduction of the tariffs. And so that gap still seems to be there. Is it going to be the announcement or is it going to be the immediate introduction? Well, it could be either. Now, it appears that Donald Trump is insistent, as you say, that there will be, quote, no exemptions at this time to the question of whether or not there might be carve-outs for countries like Britain. And we really don't know the basis of how the tariffs are going to be levied. This is one of the great problems with this, Anne. You've got an apparent process going on inside the American administration that nobody really has a handle on for determining exactly what Donald Trump and his team charge other countries. But the fear is there will be a blanket tariff. It will be between 10 and 20%. 20% being the worst that most commentators expect. Now, just to refer back, if there is a 20% tariff, that is a 0.6% hit to GDP. If the UK does then decide to introduce reciprocal tariffs, that is a 1% drop in GDP. And Keir Starmer, well, I'm slightly less downbeat than you are. Yes, it appears that last Thursday the UK was told that its negotiating strategy wasn't going to work in advance of Wednesdays, all of those things that are offered up, like the digital services tax and reducing tariffs on things like some American agricultural goods that don't break our food standards, hasn't worked for now. But I think there is a hope in government that some kind of limited trade deal can be struck a little bit further down the track. So Keir Starmer will sound a bit downbeat today, but potentially optimistic a little bit further on in the future.
I think you're right to point out that this game is not over yet, though I do sort of stick to my guns a bit, that there was, I think, too much expectation was created when Keir Starmer and Donald Trump met. And Keir Starmer was obviously rather good at building an affable relationship with a difficult US president. But so what were we then led to expect from that? And then they've had to do a bit of a sort of letting us down gently over the big, beautiful deal at the moment. But the interesting bit there, I think you are right, and I think the attention is going to shift quite quickly to the digital services part, and the UK signalling that it's prepared to drop the digital services tax, at least in part, if it got us somewhere in terms of a wider deal. And there's a bit of interesting detail there for my tech colleagues at Politico, that this is basically a three-pronged approach to give the US side choices to exempt sectors from the digital services tax. And one is just, a sort of full-on exemption. The second is to increase the threshold at which it kicks in to above 25 million, so that you would be catching the sort of that level at which it's only going to affect the slightly bigger fish. And the third, which is quite an interesting one, is to apply it to profits and not revenues, which, shall we say, if you're a large company, is going to make for some very interesting accounting. I shall leave it there, and we'll see whether it comes to fruition or not.
One of the global curiosities, or actually fascinating things going on at the moment, every country is trying to get to grips with this. So if you look at Vietnam, they're cutting import tariffs in order to appease Donald Trump. If you look at Japan, they're setting up hubs in order to help businesses hit by tariffs. I think they're one of the dirty 15 that's most likely to be hit in order to deal with Trump. If you look at India, they're looking at cutting taxes on the big tech giants in order to appease Donald Trump. Every country is throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. However, the UK, like many of these countries, has missed its deadline, and the tariffs will be introduced, or certainly will be announced, just as we have missed our 20-minute deadline. You'll have heard maybe even 2 minutes ago the 20-minute clock go off, which means that we have to bow out of your day and just simply say we'll see you tomorrow for Wednesday's edition of Politics at Sam and Anne's.
If we ever hit that 20-minute deadline dead on, listeners, do get in touch and send us a congratulatory note. Hope you indulge us for the extra minute or two.
See you then.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.